Thank you all for coming. Would you like to get ready for our next speaker, who is actually a legendary fellow? He really is. And it is my distinct pleasure to welcome this guy. Now, we're all sort of jealous because he doesn't admit it, but I will have you know that he's got a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
It's awesome.
So we're not kidding around here. Larry Elder, or the Sage, from South Central. Yeah.
He's peeking
Larry
out.
had the longest running afternoon talk show in Los Angeles. His take no prisoner style, very opinionated commentary. He's created a lot of controversy wherever he goes, but that is why we love him. Please welcome the Sage from South Central, the one and only Larry Elder.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. As you can see, I'm not dead. You can now find me on LarryElder.com, same time as always, 3 to 6, Monday through Friday, live. We have call-in number, so feel free to call in just as always. You can also hear me in the car through the car speaker. However, you need something called a car audio cable that you can pick up from CVS for $5.99. You stick one end into your smartphone, the other into your car audio import. If you don't know what that is, ask your kid, and they'll set it up for you. I'm often asked why I got into talk radio. You know, I'm a lawyer, and I was living and working in Ohio, and I wrote an op-ed piece for the newspaper, the Cleveland Plain Dealer. It got published. I always like to write op-ed pieces. Most of the time, they didn't get published. So every now and then, one got published. And I wrote a piece about government being too large, taxes being too high, regulations being too intrusive, and racism is no longer a major problem in America. Good Lord. I get a phone call from a producer of a talk show, asked me to come on and talk about my article. I said, sure. I was on for a whole hour. And I was called coconut, brown on the outside, white on the inside, Oreo, same concept. Uncle Tom, sellout, foot shuffler, bootlicker, and one that was kind of new, the Antichrist. And I was called a name that was designed to scold, to harm, to wound. I was called Republican. A man can only take so much. So I was on for an hour. I get back to my office. I said, I'll never do this again. I was screamed at, called all sorts of names. I got a phone call from the guy who owned the station. I heard you today. Yeah, you were magnificent. I was. You were funny. You took controversial positions. You defended them without losing your temper. Have you ever thought about doing talk radio? I said, no. He said, I've been doing this 25 years. You'd be wonderful. I said, no, thank you. He said, why? I said, I don't like being yelled at and yelling at other people. It strikes me as like having a conversation with my brother Dennis. I'm not interested. He said, are you married? I was at the time. He said, go home to your wife, talk to her about the opportunity. After somebody else with common sense hears this, I think you'll change your mind. I said, I doubt it. So I went home to my then wife, Cindy, and I told her about the opportunity. I said, what do you think? She said, well, I don't know. What do you think? I said, I don't know that much about talk radio, but what little I know is it seems shallow, glib, and stupid. She said, it is. You'd be good at it. True story. Gives you an idea of what happened to that marriage. The reason that I remained on air, even though after KBC dismissed it the second time, I really don't have to do this because I want to do it. We have a country to save. And in my opinion, our country is under siege, not just externally, but internally. Under siege by what I call the axis of indoctrination, and that's Hollywood, academia, and media. Hollywood, are you aware that we've got about 6 major studios that account for about 80% of what you and I see? They're all left-wing, to the extent that they contribute money to politics. 80 to 90% of the money from the major studios goes to the Democratic Party. Jeffrey Katzenberg alone from DreamWorks has raised about $16 million for Obama alone. You name the left-wing cause, they support it. Academia. Whether you're talking about public, private, big, small, east, west, north, south, almost all of academia on the humanities side is left-wing. You look at a typical department of poli-sci, for example, UCLA, 30 or 40 poli-sci members, 25 are lefties. You might find one or two who's not a lefty. And that's what we have all over the country. There are some exceptions, but by and large, whatever the school is, however the size it is, if you are a humanities professor, you're likely to be a liberal. There is a professor at a school, University of Illinois. He received a 4-page petition urging him to get involved in the BDS movement, boycott, divest, sanction Israel for allegedly oppressing Palestinians. Now, the guy that got this teaches economics. He's not a conservative. In fact, he's a Keynesian. He's a kind of economist that believes what Obama believes in priming the pump. I mention that only to show you his ideology, that he didn't say this to drive some sort of point. So he got this 4-page petition, and he noticed that of the 675 people that signed it, most of the people who signed it were professors in women's studies, gender studies, things like that. He put together a 4-page petition outlining all the atrocities committed against women in the Muslim and Arab world, not being able to drive, honor killings, being set on fire, and the like. Sent them to the same people to find out whether or not the people that wanted to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel were interested in having an equal passion about the oppression of women in the Muslim and Arab world. He said, I didn't think I would get 675 signatures, but I was surprised when I got almost none. This is what we're up against. Media. Overwhelmingly left-wing. You look at any poll, whether it's done by Pew Research or done by Harvard, 3-1, 4-1, 5-1, liberal versus conservative. And they're the ones who decide what we see. There was a survey in 1980, Columbia School of Journalism, arguably our finest school of journalism. 40% of the students thought that corporations should be owned by government. The majority of them felt that workers were screwed by employers. These are people, fast forward now, who are in their mid-50s, who are news directors, who are deciding what we see. And it's an outrage. We're under siege, of course, externally. And one of the problems, in my opinion, going forward, and I would urge all Republicans to be thinking about this, how are we going to talk about the Iraq War? Last night, I'm watching Fox. Dennis Kucinich, who used to be a congressman from Ohio, is on, and he said, and I quote, "The war in Iraq was built on lies," end of quote. I understand opposition to the war. I get it. I understand that people in this room might have opposed the war from the very beginning. I understand that. There were good reasons to oppose the war. I did not, and I still don't. But for crying out loud, can we at least defend the man against the charge that he lied us into the war? Is that a problem? What kind of president, after 9/11, when 90% of Americans thought we were going to get hit again within a year, when Saddam Hussein was violating all sorts of United Nations resolutions, and George W. Bush looked around and said, what can I do to make sure this does not happen again? What's the most likely threat? The son of a bee over here who's got chemical weapons, we know because he used them on his own people. He's sending $25,000 to the families of homicide bombers in Israel, stealing from the Oil for Food program, had used chemical weapons because he invaded Kuwait, he invaded Iran, used them on the Iranians, used them on the Kurds, tried to assassinate President George Herbert Walker Bush. All 16 of our intelligence agencies, there are 16 that involve intelligence, all 16 said that Saddam Hussein had stockpiles of chemical and biological weapons. The only dispute was how far he was away from getting a nuke. All 16 said this at the highest level of probability. Now, what president says, I don't care what you say. I'm going to ignore everything that you say. I don't believe he's got this. What president would do that? So all I'm asking is when Rand Paul, who opposed the war, and other Republicans who opposed the war, get up there and talk about the problems that were made and how I'm different from George W. Bush, at least defend the man's honor. That's all I'm asking. Defend the man's honor. Can we at least do that? My reason that I'm so optimistic about this country, the reason I'm so positive about it is because my parents, my mom and my dad. Quick story about my father. My name is Elder. My father does not know who his biological father is, never met him. The man named Elder, who was in my dad's life the longest, was an alcoholic who physically abused him and physically abused his mother. My father was thrown out of the house when he was 13 years old by his mother's then boyfriend, and his mom sided with the boyfriend. My dad never went back home. On his own, from 13 years old, Jim Crow South during the Great Depression, a black kid. Okay, what do? My dad said he went around, knocked on doors, asked for any kind of work he could get. Finally, somebody asked him to clean the lawn. He began doing that, got promoted to being a cook. My dad was always looking for the next thing. He applied for and got a job as a Pullman porter. They were the largest private employer of blacks in those days. He traveled all around the country and came out to California. And it was sunny. And people were smiling. And he made a mental note that maybe someday I'll relocate to California. World War II breaks out. My dad joins the Marines. I said, Dad, why the Marines? He said, they go where the action is, and I love the uniforms. They made him a cook. He was stationed on the island of Guam as we were preparing to invade the island of Japan. The bombs fell. The war is over. My dad now goes back to the South to get a job as a cook because he cooked in the service. They promoted him to staff sergeant, which, by the way, was warp speed. Even in the compressed times of World War II, to be promoted in 11 months to staff sergeant meant that you were a badass. My father was a badass. And so he goes back south to Chattanooga to get a job as a cook, having cooked for thousands and thousands and thousands of GIs. And he's told, we don't hire niggers. My father goes to an unemployment office, goes to the door. The lady says, sir, you went through the wrong door. Go back outside. My father went back outside, saw colored only, goes through that door to the very same woman who sent him out. My father came home and told my mother, whom he had just married, this is BS. I'm going to California and get me a job as a cook. So my dad comes to California in 1947, walks all around to get a job as a cook, and he's told, I'm sorry, sir, you have no references, which is the way we do it in California. My dad said, I cooked for GIs stationed on Guam. Sorry, we need references. My dad said, I will cook for free for 2 weeks. Just write me a reference. Sorry. He goes to an unemployment office, this time only one door, and the lady says, we have nothing. My father says, what time do you open? She said, 8. What time do you close? They said, 5. My dad said, I'll be here at 8. I'll be here till 5 until I find something. My dad sat in that chair for a day and a half. Lady calls him up and says, I've got something for you. I don't think you'll want it. My dad said, I'm sure I'll want it if it pays. It's a job as a janitor. You'll be cleaning toilets. My dad said, no problem. Took the job for 10 years. Took a second job cleaning toilets for 10 years. Saved his nickels and dime. Went to night school at night to get the GED that he never had. And cooked for a family from time to time on the weekends to make some extra money. He averaged probably about 4 hours of sleep a night, which is why he was always grouchy. And so he started a cafe, and he ran it until his 80s. And my dad always told my brothers and me, hard work wins. You get out of life what you put into it. No matter how hard you work, bad things will happen. How you respond to those bad things will tell your mother and me whether or not we raised a man. To which I would always say, thank you. To which I would always say, not too much pressure, Dad. I want to tell you a couple of quick stories and then I'll get out of here. I'm on it. My mother, for a black woman in the South, my mother was really royalty. She lived on a farm that her family owned. Very, very rare. And so my mother's experience was altogether different from my father's. My mom was the same way. Hard work wins. She sat me down when I was 7 years old. The reason I know that is because I can picture the other house that we lived in. went over every president from George Washington to the then incumbent Dwight Eisenhower. My mother told me, Larry, if you work hard enough, someday you can be in this book if you want to be. And I believed it. Always believed it. Mother said, don't let anybody else define you but you. We were talking about a poem one day in class, and it was a poem that was written by a man named County Cullen. And it was a poem that offended everybody. Offended the teacher, offended the students, offended everybody. And it went like this. While riding through old Baltimore, so small and full of glee, I saw a young Baltimorean keep a looking straight at me. Now I was young and very small, and he was no whit bigger, and so I smiled, but he poked out his tongue and called me nigger. I saw the whole of Baltimore from May until September. Of all the things that happened there, that's all that I remember. Well, I was mad, teacher was mad, everybody was mad. I went home mad. My mother was in the kitchen stirring a big pot of greens. I'll never forget it. I said, Mom, we read a poem in class. I want to read it to you. She says, go ahead. I said, it goes like this. While riding through old Baltimore, so small and full of glee, I saw young Baltimorean keep a looking straight at me. Now I was young and very small, and he was no whit bigger. And so I smiled, but he poked out his tongue and called me nigger. I saw the whole of Baltimore from May until September. Of all the things that happened there, that's all that I remember. My mom took the spoon out of the plate and she said, too bad he let something so trivial spoil his vacation. True story. Last story. Tell you how great this country is. This is a few months ago. I'm at a gas station, and I get out. I had a nice suit on. I have a car given to me by my sponsor, Rennet Cadillac. And I get out, and I'm getting my car full of premium gas. A car pulls up behind me, a 1968 Dodge Polara. Two guys get out, both kind of pasty skin, tattoos everywhere, probably about 5 teeth between the two of them. I'm not trying to be stereotypical. I'm just describing it. And they're speaking English, but their grammar is so bad it's hard to understand them. And they get $5 of regular, busted muffler, roar out, and I said, wow, just think. Those two dudes owe me reparations. Is this a great country or what? God bless you. God bless America. Thank you so much for having me. LarryElder.com.